So good evening, class. I think, like what I have uh, said last week, we're going to discuss this week the implementing rules and regulations of the Public Act 1966. So, our Public Act 1966, the Architecture Act of 2004, this is something that you must really familiarize yourselves with as future architects of this nation. So I'm just going to read first. So the implementing rules and regulations of the Public Act 1966, an act providing for a more responsive and comprehensive regulation for the registration, licensing, and practice of architecture, repealing for the purpose Public Act 545 as amended, otherwise known as Act to Regulate the Practice of Architecture in the Philippines and for other purposes. So Republic Act 9266 class was promulgated in 2004 to repeal RA 545, which is the former architecture law or design law. Okay. So, pursuant to Section 7, Article 2, and Section 41, Article 5 of Republic Act 9266, known as the Architecture Act of 2004, Board of Architecture hereby prescribes, adopts, and promulgates the following rules and regulations to carry out the provisions thereof. We have Rule 1, the title, policy statement, definition of terms, and scope of practice. Okay, so you have in Section 1, the title. So the rules and regulations shall be known as the rules and regulations implementing the provisions of the Public Act 9266, otherwise known as the Architecture Act of 2004, for brevity to be cited as the IRR of the Architecture Act of 2004. Okay, so I think we will be discussing class this week the IRR of the said law, because it's really important to us architects and for you future generations of architects as well in this nation to know this law. Section 2, Statement of Policy. The state recognizes the importance of architects in nation building and development. So, hence, it shall develop and nurture competent, virtuous, productive, and well-rounded professional architects whose standards of practice and service shall be excellent, qualitative, world-class, and globally competitive through inviolable, honest, effective, and credible licensure examinations, and through regulatory measures, programs, and activities that foster their professional growth and development. So the IRR of the Architecture Act of 2004 shall be interpreted, construed, and carried out in the light of the statement of policy found in Section 2 of Republic Act 9266 as stated above. Section 3, the definition of terms. Okay, so these are the definitions that's stated in the law. First is architecture, is the art, science, or profession of planning, designing, and constructing buildings in their totality, taking into account their environment in accordance with the principles of utility, strength, and beauty. Okay, so I think class, some of you were my students back when you were in first year. Okay, so that's what I've told you before, that architecture is not just an art, it's also science. So it means that you have to use the left and the right side of your brain simultaneously in order to do something, in order to create a design. Okay? So it's not just purely artistic in nature. You must also study its scientific aspects as well. Because it's not true when they say that architecture is just drawings. Okay? Because you have to know how to construct. Okay, that's why class, I always encourage my students as early as now to start familiarizing different construction methods, so that when you design something in the future, you will know what material to use and how you're going to construct it. Okay, so that's what it means. Architecture is an art and science. So, what does the term architect mean as described by the law? So, architect means a person professionally and academically qualified, registered and licensed under Republic Act 9266 with a certificate of registration and personal identification card issued by the Professional Regulatory Board of Architecture and the Professional Regulation Commission. and who is responsible for advocating the fair and sustainable development, welfare, and cultural expression of society's habitat in terms of space, forms, and historical context. Okay, so what does this statement mean? To be called an architect class, first you must be academically qualified. So what does this mean? First, you must graduate the 5-year architecture course. Okay? So I think most of you know that some disciplines of engineering, it's already reduced to 4 years, but architecture is still 5 years. Because that's in resonance with how the architecture curriculum is with other countries. Okay? So registered and licensed under 1966 a certificate of registration. So your certificate of registration class is something that you'll receive when after you're off taking. Then you also have a professional identification card, which will be issued by the PRC Board of Architecture and PRC itself. Okay. So being an architect means that you are an advocate for fair and sustainable development. And you also take care of the cultural expression of society's habitat in terms of space, forms, and historical context. Okay? So this means class historical context. I think it also means that being an architect, you must be sensitive to the historical significance of buildings. For example, when you're altering a building or when you're renovating it, you must be aware of its past also. Okay, so these are the different definitions. First, you have an architect of record. So it means the architect and registered and licensed under RE 1966 who is directly and professionally responsible for the total design of the project for the client and who shall assume the legal civil liability for the plan, specifications, and contract documents he has signed and sealed. So what does this mean, class? Is that if you are the architect of record, it means that you are the one who signed and sealed the plans, you are the main designer, you prepare the specifications and other contract documents. You will be called the architect of record. Okay? Then we also have what you call an architect in charge of construction. So it means an architect registered and licensed under IR 1966 who is directly and professionally liable for the construction supervision of the project. Okay, if the architect of record class is professionally liable for the design of the plans, the building itself, its specifications, the contract documents, etc., the architect in charge of construction is liable during as the one who will supervise the construction of the project. Then we also have what you call the consulting architect. So it means the architect registered and licensed or permitted to practice under RE 9266 who is professionally and academically qualified and with exceptional or recognized expertise or specialization in any branch of architecture. Okay, so architecture class is not only a single branch, there are other branches as well which you may want to specialize in the near future. Okay, so a consulting architect, it means that he or she is already specialized in that particular field. Okay, that's why the consulting architect will think my experience when I was working abroad, the consulting architect is the one who provides much more detailed advice to the client to a particular project or problems that arise in the site. Okay. So let's see what's the general practice of architecture as defined in RE 9266. So the practice of architecture, according here, is act of planning and architectural designing. Structural conceptualization. So what does this mean? Structural conceptualization is that when you do your plans, you already know where you're going to place your columns. Specifying, supervising, and giving general administration and responsible direction, the erection, enlargement, or alteration of buildings and building environments, and architectural design in engineering structures or any part thereof. The scientific, aesthetic, and orderly coordination of all the processes which enter into the production of a complete building or structure performed through the medium of unbiased preliminary studies of plans, consultations, specifications, conferences, evaluations, investigations, contract documents, and oral advice and directions, regardless of whether the persons engaged in such practice are residents of the Philippines or have their principal office or place of business in this country or another territory, and regardless of whether such persons are performing one or all these duties or whether such duties are performed in person or as the directing head of an office or organization performing them. So, what does this statement mean? Okay. First, the general practice of architecture class, here it's stated it is an act of planning and architectural designing. So when you do your elevations, perspectives, or in, practicing this. Okay? Structural conceptualization, you're looking into the location of the columns. We're going to place that in the plans, specifying, and I think you have the subject, supervising and giving general administration and responsible to the erection, enlargement. So erection meaning the construction itself. Enlargement, you're going to make a building bigger. Alteration, going to alter the use or the form of the building and building environments. And architectural design, engineering, structures, or any part. It's also scientific, aesthetic, and I think this is something to take note, orderly coordination of all the processes, which enter the production of a complete building or structure performed through the medium of unbiased preliminary studies of plans, consultations, specifications, conferences, evaluation, investigations, contract documents, and oral advice and directions, regardless of whether the persons in such practice are residents of the Philippines or have their principal office or place of business in the country or another territory, regardless of whether such persons are performing one of all the duties, whether such duties are performed in person or as the directing head of an office or organization performing them. So what's the significance of this statement here? Okay. This statement here, class, it means that as long as you're already doing these services, here stated here, whether you are a resident of the Philippines or you're in another country or you're the directing head of an office or organization which supervises these services, this practice, it means that you are already practicing architecture in the Philippines. Okay? What the importance and significance of this is that the general practice of architecture should only be taken or should only be performed by licensed and practicing architects in the country. Okay, now let's get into the more detailed scope of the practice of architecture. So it encompasses the provision of professional services in connection with site, physical planning and design, construction, enlargement, conservation, renovation, remodeling, restoration, or alteration of a building or group of buildings. Services may include but are not limited to planning, architectural designing, and structural conceptualization. I think it was mentioned here, the general practice. Okay. You have consultation, consultancy, giving advice or written advice and directions, conferences, evaluations, investigations, quality surveys, appraisals and adjustments, architectural and operational planning, site analysis, and other pre-design services. Okay. You also have schematic design, design development, contract documents, and construction phases, including professional consultancies. You also have the preparation of preliminary, technical, economic, and financial feasibility studies of plans, models, and project promotional services. Okay. I think there's a very few architects class for engaging with financial feasibility studies of plans. I think, in my experience with this was that I think it was back in 2010 when I was working for a certain company. What we do is that if there's a particular site or location here in Cagayan de Oro, we're going to study what's the best type of structure to be built in that area based on what we have observed and the data we have gathered. For example, in a certain corner, if in our study, you'll find that it is best to build a restaurant or a hotel in that location. Then we're going to make a feasibility study about it, and then we're going to present to the owner uh, our project proposal. And then you have project promotional services. So it means last. So that it means last. You are doing, for example, you are doing an animation for a certain subdivision, and you provide the perspectives, the floor, the rent, presentation plans. They are already considered as project promotional services to entice clients and buying their products. Okay? Then you have the preparation of architectural plans, specifications, bill of materials, cost estimate, general conditions, and bidding documents. Then you also have construction and project management, giving general management, administration, supervision, coordination, and responsible direction or the planning, architectural designing, construction, reconstruction, erection, enlargement or demolition, renovation, repair, orderly removal, remodeling, alteration, preservation or restoration of buildings or structures, or complex buildings including all their components, sites and environs intended for private or public use. Then you also have the planning, architectural layouting and utilization of spaces within and surrounding such buildings or structures, housing design and community architecture, architectural interiors and space planning, architectural detailing, architectural lighting, acoustics, architectural layouting of mechanical, electrical, electronics, sanitary, plumbing, communications, and other utility systems, equipment, and fixtures. Okay? What's important here to take note, class, is the term architectural layouting. Okay? So, it does not mean, class, that we are already, we're already doing the scope of the mechanical and electrical engineers by this statement. It only means that the architect will do the architectural layout. But of course, its finalization should be coordinated with in case of the mechanical, a professional mechanical engineer. In terms of electrical, the professional electrical engineer. In terms of the electronics, a professional electronics and communications engineer. For the sanitary, we have your sanitary engineer and a master plumber. We have the plumbing, communications, and other utility systems, and etc. Okay? So that's why, class, at least in your building tech, you already know how to do these plans. So that when you're going to coordinate with the different engineering disciplines, at least they already have an idea of what you want to do with the project. Okay? Then you also have building programming, building administration, construction arbitration, architectural conservation, and restoration. Okay, so I think I don't know if you're familiar with construction arbitration, but this happens last if there's a conflict between the owner or another party involved in the construction of the house. It could be with another architect, it could be with the another contractor as well. All works which relate to the scientific, aesthetic, and orderly coordination of all works and branches of the work systems, and processes necessary for the production of a complete building or structure, whether for public or private use, in order to enhance or safeguard life, health, property, and the promotion and enrichment of the quality of life, the architectural design of engineering structures or any part thereof, and all works, projects, and activities which require the professional competence of an architect, including teaching of architectural subjects and architectural computer-aided design. Okay, so can you just imagine, class, if um, someone other than an architect will be teaching you the subject, building laws, or in doing your CAD, your instructor is from a different discipline. Of course, the viewpoint will be quite different. Okay, but I really appreciate that it's stated here in the law. Okay, another thing, class, I want you to really internalize that architecture is not just aesthetics. There's a scientific process to it. Okay? So you have to forget, no, not forget. You have balance the artistic and the scientific aspects. Not balance lang. Okay? One should not be more than the other, because you're not artist, you're not doing fine arts. So you really have to be well aware of the technical aspects of architecture as well. Then you have structural conceptualization. So it means the act of conceiving, choosing, and developing the type, disposition, arrangement, and proportioning of the structural elements of an architectural work, giving due consideration to safety, cost effectiveness, functionality, and aesthetics. Okay? Okay, so I think, class, you should know that before 9266 was passed in 2004, architects do structural design as well. Now with Republic Act 9266, class, this was promulgated to delineate the professions of civil engineering, structural engineering, and architecture. Okay, so the detailed structural design are now given to the structural and civil engineers, while we architects, we do the architectural aspect only. So I think that's the main purpose of this law. Okay? Hence the term structural conceptualization. But if you have noticed, class, in our curriculum and our subjects, your structural, I think you have very heavy structural subjects as well. Okay? You have subjects in, I think, steel and concrete design, wood and masonry design as well, when you're going to compute the different loadings, requirements of a building. Okay. I remember when back in 2007 or 2006, our final exam was to design a 4-story commercial building using ultimate strength design. Okay, so that's something that you're going to study in detail as you go into higher levels of architecture. Okay. Then it's also defined here what's an architectural firm is. So it means a sole proprietorship, meaning there's only one owner, a partnership wherein there's 2 architects, or a corporation registered with the DTI and or SEC. So take note here, it says DTI and or SEC, and then with the Board of Architecture and RC. And another term is defined here, authorship. So refers to the author or authors of a set of architectural plans or specifications who are in charge of their preparation, whether made by them personally or under their immediate supervision. Then number 8, a board refers to the Professional Regulatory Board of Architecture. 9, the commission means the Professional Regulatory Commission. Then you also have a definitive service agreement. So it means a duly notarized written contract or equivalent public instrument stipulating the scope of services and guaranteeing compensation of such services to be rendered by an architect registered and licensed under our Public Act 9266. So, violation of the service agreement is a basis for civil liability under Article 1723 of the Civil Code unless he or she attempts and or succeeds to interfere or contravene the legal and professional functions of the architect of record as the consulting architect. Okay, so your service agreement class is really important. Okay? Just want you to inform you in advance that when you're already architects or practicing your profession, this is something that you must always produce. Okay? So that's why you're called professionals, because you will be in a professional agreement with your client. Okay? So you don't just render services just directly. Okay? You must enter into an agreement with the client. And then you're going to state there what are the terms for your services and how much you're going to get paid. Okay. Then we also define here, it's also defined as law here, what the integrated and accredited professional organization, which means the existing official national organization of all architects of the Philippines, in which all registered Filipino architects shall be members without prejudice to membership in other voluntary professional organizations. What does this mean, class? Is that all architects, they are members of the IAPOA or the Integrated Accredited Professional Organization. In the case of architecture, it is the United Architects of the Philippines. Okay? But it does not mean that you're already a member of the UAP that you can't be a member with other voluntary professional organizations as well. Then you have the professional, continuing professional development. It refers to a sustaining and progressive learning process that maintains, enhances, or increases the knowledge and continuing ability of architects. This is important, class, to remember that once you become architects, it does not mean that your learning will end there. Okay? So, as you progress, as you acquire more experience, you should also try to acquire knowledge as well. So learning does not end after college. You could pursue a master's degree, after that pursue a doctoral degree, or you could study the other fields of architecture as well. Then you have DTI, which mean the Department of Trade and Industry. You have the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, association, any formal grouping of two or more architects or architectural firms working in a joint venture on a project basis. Architectural company means a juridical entity that shall be synonymous with an architectural partnership registered in SEC. Okay, then you have an architecture corporation, so it means a group of professionals, architecture and allied professions incorporated with architects for the purpose of delivering professional service in architecture and allied professions. In case an existing architectural corporation does not comply with the 75% composition requirement, it shall comply and register again with the SEC and the Board of Architecture. So architecture corporations class should at least have a 75% composition requirement, which means that 75% of the group should be architects. Now let's define what architecture documents are. So it means architectural drawings, specifications, and other outputs of an architect that only an architect can sign and seal, among others. Vicinity maps, site development plans, architectural program, perspective drawing, architecture floor plans, elevations, sections, ceiling plans, schedules, detailed drawings, technical specifications, and cost estimates, and other instruments of service in form. Now let's go with architectural interiors. It means a detailed planning and design of the indoor enclosed areas of any proposed building or structure, including retrofit or renovation work, and which shall cover all architectural and utility aspects, including the architectural layouting of all building engineering systems found therein. Okay, then you also have here architectural partnership. It means two or more architects duly registered the SEC and with the Board of Architecture. Also defined here is architectural plans. It means two-dimensional representations reflecting a proposed development of an enclosed, semi-enclosed, or open area showing features of elements such as columns, walls, partitions, ceilings, stairs, doors, windows, floors, roof, room designations, door and window callouts, the architectural equipment, furnishings, furniture and the like, specifications, callout, elevation references, drawing references, and the like. The architecture plan is the representation of a lateral section of a proposed building or structure running parallel to ground at a height of from 1 to 1.5 meters above the finished floor. So the term may also collectively refer to other architectural designs such as across the longitudinal sections, elevations, roof plan, reflected ceiling plan, detailed sections and elevations showing architectural interiors, detailed architectural designs, door and window schedules, other architectural finishing schedules, and the like. Then you should also have a definition here of what a building is, which means a structure for the purpose and function of habitation and other uses. Okay, then let's have here the certificate of registration, which means a certificate bearing a registration number issued to an individual with a professional regulatory commission through the Board of Architecture, signifying that the individual has successfully passed the licensure examination and is registered to practice his or her profession as an architect. Okay, so you'll get your COR class after passing the board exam. Then you have a code of ethical conduct, so it means a document which forms part of the architect's national code, which contains the norms and principles governing the practice of the profession of architecture in the highest standards of ethical conduct. Okay, I think this is one of the things that I want to inculcate to you, class, when we reach our professional practice to the code of ethical conduct. Okay, so sometimes, class, some professionals, even some architects, they no longer follow the ethical conduct just to get projects. But you know, class, the law itself, Public Act 9266, and other UAP documents, as long as you follow them religiously and you make the client understand the true value of an architect, you have enough projects here in the Philippines that no architect would be left behind or without a project. Okay. So that's why you have our standard SPP documents and standards of professional practice, wherein there are recommended professional fees. Okay, we'll discuss that later when you reach your professional practice. You also have here the definition of consulting architect. So a consulting architect is a registered and licensed who is academically and professionally qualified. Academically class means that completed already the 5 years course. Then professionally qualified means that already passed the board exam with exceptional or recognized expertise or specialization in any branch of architecture. So the consulting architect assumes no civil liability under Article 173 of the Civil Code unless he or she attempts or succeeds to interfere or contravene the legal and professional functions of the architecture office. So unless the consulting architect class already intervenes with the functions of the architect's record, that's when he or she will assume the civil liabilities under Article 173. So the consulting architect assumes the normal civil liability in their service agreement he or she signs with the client. Okay? Then you have here the contract documents. So these are the documents attached to the agreement identified as contract documents. So including all additions, deletions, and modifications incorporated therein. So these generally include the following documents. So you have the special provisions or conditions. You have the general conditions, drawings, specifications, and other bid documents. Then the copyright or copyright ownership shall refer to the intellectual property rights retained by an architect over any architectural documents work that he or she prepares unless there is a written stipulation to the contrary. Copyright in a work of architecture shall include the right to control the erection of any building which reproduces the whole or a substantial part of the work either in the original form or in any form recognizably derived from the original. However, the copyright in any such work shall not include the right to control the reconstruction or rehabilitation in the same style as the original of a building which the copyright protects. Here we have the CPE providers. In Diversified Architectural Experience. This is something class that you will take after you graduate. So it's a post-baccalaureate pre-licensure experience of 2 years required of a graduate of architecture prior to taking the licensure examination. So it consisting of variation of experiences in the different phases of architectural service. So when you graduate class, I really encourage you to spend a lot of time in the site because you will really learn a lot there. Then we have here a foreign architect. It means an architect who is not a Filipino citizen nor an architect registered and licensed in the Philippines but who is fully registered and licensed in his or her home country as an architect. We have here the Filipino counterpart. The local Philippine architect, partnership or corporation that has worked in association with the foreign architect, partnership or corporation on a project on Philippine soil. Okay, so here the ownership shall refer to the proprietary rights to an architect such as plans, designs, and other documents by a person, juridical entity who commissions the architect and whose ownership of an architectural work by such a person, juridical entity shall only be confined to the use of the architectural documents for executing or implementing the work described therein or one of the original projects. Ownership shall not apply to the use or of a part or of the entire architectural work or architectural documents to repetitions or to subsequent projects. Here, planning refers to physical planning, the site, community planning, or urban level with an architect. Then, the physical planner is also fine. Okay, then let's go here. Standards of professional practice. So it means a document embodied in the architect's national code which defines all acts of professional service, describes minimum basic fees, establishes the rights and obligations of both the architect and the client. Okay, I think that we'll discuss the detailed SPP class or standards of professional practice when you reach your professional practice 2 or 3. Okay, so these are really important things to know. Your standards of professional practice class will allow you to give you an idea on how to communicate with your client in terms of the services that you can render for them. Okay? So this is something you must really familiarize or have a grasp someday. Okay? Because the SPP will guide you on how much you will charge the client. Okay, for the different project types. Then you have here definition of sole proprietorship. It's already discussed. A specialization. Okay, so it's an expert is and special knowledge in the field of architecture acquired by an architect through formal education and/or training or through continuing professional development experience which architect engages a consultant architect. We also have a syllabi. The outlines embodying topics and concepts of major subjects prescribed in a specific course of study to serve as basis for test questions in the licensure examinations. Technology transfer, urban design, anything, just browse through that. Preparation of your board exam class, I think it's important also to have an idea about the different activities being. So let's just pass that. Now let's move on to Rule 2. The Professional Regulated Board of Architecture, the organization, powers, and functions. Okay, so Section 4 states that there is a hereby created a Professional Regulatory Board of Architecture, named after the referred as the board, a collegial body under the supervision and administrative control of the Professional Regulation Commission, hereinafter referred to as the Commission, composed by chairman, 2 members appointed by the President of the Philippines, with a list of 3 recommendees, chosen from a list of 5 nominees for each position submitted to the Commission by the IAPOA, which is the UPP. So, the board shall be organized and not less than 6 months after the Architecture Act 2000. So these are the qualifications. So it should be a citizen and a resident of the Philippines, be a holder of a degree in the Bachelor of Science in Architecture, conferred by a school, college, or university in the Philippines or abroad that is recognized and or accredited by the Commission on Higher Education. So be an architect with a valid COR, active practitioner of architecture for at least 10 years of the date of his appointment. So yes, will already be a 10-year architect. Be a board member. Not be a member of the faculty of any school, college, university, or review institution where a regular course or review course in architecture is taught, nor have pecuniary interest in such institution. So no former member of the faculty of any school, institute, university, or review center where architecture is taught can become a member of the board unless he or she had officially resigned from such institution and has completely stopped teaching, advising, or doing activities for at least 5 years prior to completion. So has never been convicted of any crime involving moral turpitude and not be an elected officer of the IAPOA and other professional organization of architects. So here we have here the terms of office. So the members of the board shall hold office for a term of 3 years after appointment or until the successors shall have been appointed and duly qualified. So any vacancy including the term of a member shall be filled for the unexpired portion of the term only. So each member of the board may be reappointed for one full term of 3 years, or the members of the board first appointed under IR 266. One member should be appointed to hold office as chairman for 3 years, one member for 2 years, and one member for 1 year. So each member of the board shall qualify by taking the proper oath prior to the performance of their duties, provided that the incumbent members of the board shall continue to serve for the remainder of their term as members of the created Professional Regulated Board of Architecture until a new board shall have been properly organized, provided that the incumbent members of the board may be appointed as members of the first board. So here are the functions, powers and functions of the board. Okay, then prescribe and adopt the IRR of the Architecture Act of 2004, carrying out the provisions of RA 1966. Supervise the registration, licensure, and practice of architects. Administer oath in connection with the administration of RA 1966. Issue, revoke, or instate the COR and professional identification card for the practice of the architecture profession. So it means last that the board has the power to issue, suspend, and can also reinstate your COR and PIC or professional identification card, and adopt an official seal of the board. Monitor the conditions affecting the practice of architecture, and adopt such measures as may be deemed proper for the enhancement and maintenance of high professional, ethical, and technical standards for the profession. Then prescribe and or adopt the Code of Ethical Conduct and Standards of Professional Practice. Hear and decide administrative cases involving violations of RA 1966, the Code of Ethical Conduct and Standards of Professional Practice, and for this purpose to issue subpoena ad testicandum and subpoena duces to secure the appearance of witnesses and production of documents in connection therewith provided, so that the decision of the board shall, unless the petition become final and executory after 15 days the receipt of notice. So something that you must familiarize us is the 15 days notice. Then the decision of the commission may be appealed to the Court of Appeals in accordance with the procedure under the rule of law. Okay, so if there is a decision by the commission class regarding a certain architect, that architect can still appeal to the Court of Appeals. Prescribe guidelines for the CPD program and consultation with integrated accredited professional decision architects. Provided that the attendance of the said CPD shall not be a mandatory requirement for the renewal of a professional identification card. Okay, so this is something. Maybe this will make no conflict with the CPD law. Prepare, adopt, issue, or amend the syllabi of subjects. Approve, limit, or cancel temporary or special permit to practice architecture. I think Section K class is something provided to architects who are not Filipino citizens or are architects in other countries who wish to practice here in the Philippines. So, coordination with CHED, ensure that all higher educational instruction offerings of architecture comply with the policy standards and requirements of task course prescribed by CHED in areas of curriculum, faculty, library, and facilities. M. To adopt a program for full computerization of the licensure examination and discharge such other duties and functions as may be deemed necessary for the enhancement of the architecture profession and the upgrading development both of the architectural education. The policies, resolutions, rules, and regulations issued or promulgated by the board shall be subject to the approval of the commission. However, the board's decisions, the resolutions, or orders rendered in administrative cases shall be subject to review only if one. Okay, so I think as we've already covered some until section 7 of the IRR of RA 9266. Okay. Next meeting, we're going to start again with section 8. So, yeah, I think we have already discussed the important points. So, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me anytime that I'll try my best to answer your question regarding RA 9266. So I encourage you class to read the law, the official gazette, try to familiarize it because this will affect your future practices someday when you become architects. Okay? So knowledge of the law class is important, especially in our profession, because it will really help you, not just in passing the board exam, it also help you in uh, dealing professionally with your clients, how you're going to, what you call this, give legal basis to the fees to be collected from them. Okay, so stay safe, class, and see you next